Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ready to Teach Week. My name is Dom McGrath, and it is my absolute pleasure on behalf of Italy to open this week of events and this particular panel. So hopefully you're here to talk about how we can help students to see the outcomes. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the country on which we all gather and recognise that the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and the custodianship of the land on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. Before we begin the panel, there's a couple of things I feel I should say about this semester. It's looking like an incredibly busy semester, and there's a few things I want to make sure we're on your bingo list before it starts. The first one is there's been changes to the course and teaching evaluations policy. I know this affects people sometimes far more than you'd like to be affected, and some of those policy updates will have an impact. On the 19th, the new policy becomes live, and on the 14th, there's a workshop in the morning if you'd like to get along and understand everything that's happening there. The other policy update we've had is the exams and assessment procedures have changed. If you want to go and see them, there is a link, and there's support happening for those changes. I think the important thing is to know they're happening, have a quick look and check that none of them particularly affect you too much. There's some big things happening about extensions, which I think are good, and around exams and what we have to release to people, which I think will make a positive impact for everyone. The other thing happening this semester is students are now required to complete the UQ Respect training. So if you've got new students coming through, if they haven't completed that module by Sunday, the 10th of March, they're going to lose access to learn.uq for a little bit. Trying to get the word out there to make sure that students aren't surprised by this. It's also a really valuable module. The more students I think you engage with this and learn to create a more respectful and engaging environment at UQ, the better. The last thing is that course profiles are finally coming in, Jack, and this semester we're going to get access to them so that we can start building for next semester. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they look like and getting to play. It's been a while coming, but I believe it's actually going to happen. Okay. The other thing we're doing within Italy that I think is really exciting is we've got an interview series with staff across the university to try and help people improve what happens with CCATs. We know this is always a tricky thing to deal with. This semester, I think it's going to be even trickier as a pile of things happen with policy and systems. So to help, we've got some interviews around. If you'd like to have a look, please jump online, review the videos, and see if they can help you improve your experience of CCATs. If you haven't noticed, we have 2 weeks happening in 1 week this semester, or this week. It's also Integrity Week. So we've got some events that are overlapping. We've got a great event around academic integrity, I think on Thursday afternoon. And we've also just released the Student Honour Code. So this has been developed by students, has been approved throughout, and hopefully it's a valuable thing to get students to think about why they would like to engage with integrity and why that's useful, why it's part of our culture and our values at UQ. It's on the screen if you'd like to read it. If you can think of ways where you can incorporate this in a valuable way into your teaching, I recommend it. There'll be a lot of discussion and support about promoting this and rolling this out across the university this year. So that brings me to the point that I'm really excited about and getting to talk with our panel. So we promised to talk around the content, well, talking beyond content and skills, to the deeper, sometimes harder, more interesting things that you asked me around higher education. I've been lucky enough to work on the revised graduate attribute policy, and it's really come to my attention that surfacing some of these, explaining the value of these to students, it's going to be really tricky in some parts. If you haven't met my son, I think he's really awesome. He is a student at this university. He's also one of those people who I think will look at many of those sort of attributes, things like meta learning, employability skills, as probably more of an obstacle to him graduating than actually something that's going to help him. And trying to get him to turn around and see the value of these is beyond my skill as a parent, but hopefully as educators, it's something that we can help our students see. And so I brought together 3 people who I think are absolutely phenomenal in this space, and I have gotten to see glimpses of their work. I'm really looking forward to talking to them more around how they get students to see the value of the amazing things they do and bring students along on that journey to put in the effort and the work to achieve these greater, deeper, more interesting outcomes that we want to achieve in higher education. So I'm going to sort of ask them to introduce themselves, because I think I've done enough. And Louise, could I introduce you and ask you to tell me a bit about your teaching and your approaches to teaching those complex things that students don't always immediately see the benefit of?
Sure. So my name's Louise Ainscough, and I'm from the School of Biomedical Sciences, and I teach anatomy and physiology, primarily to first year students and also students who are in allied health disciplines. So they're coming in and learning quite a content-heavy course really early on. And I really like to try to focus on helping students to I really liked the words you used, Dom, actually, talking about going beyond the content, because my students, they're very much focused on the content because we're focused on the content too, and there's a lot of it. So I really want to encourage my students to not just think about what it is that they need to learn, but also how they can go about learning it. So really focusing on those metacognitive skills of thinking about the process of learning.
Thank you. Suresh.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Suresh. I'm actually from the School of Agriculture and Food Sustainability. We're out at the Gatton campus. Well, half of us are, but the rest of us are at Hartley Teakle. And I actually teach into the first year biology and chemistry courses out here at Gatton. And I guess I have a very different kind of unique challenge in that a lot of my students actually know much more about the field and the industry than I do. And actually many of my colleagues as well, because a lot of our students come into an ag program and they've been there, done that, and that's their whole life for a lot of them. And so the challenge that we have is to teach them the other stuff that they sort of need to know, the other aspects of the world that they haven't really looked at, and also look at things like biology and chemistry where they see no relevance to those things in their world at the moment. And so one of the things that I think I bring to the picture is I'm someone not from agriculture, but being able to show them where I fit in the bigger scheme of things and what I can bring to that conversation that they have with me. Show them that, you need different kind of people to make the world work. And where they could fit into that conversation, even if they are not, let's say, very much into the ag, but they're in, let's say, a different component of it or a small aspect of it, where they fit in, and to know that the cog needs to be fully oiled for the machine to work, essentially. Yeah.
Thanks, Suresh. Anna.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Richards. I'm a senior manager in student affairs, and I work predominantly in enrichment and employability and careers space. So some of the work that I do around is creating opportunities for students to engage in a lot of different experiential learning opportunities inside and outside the curriculum. So we predominantly work with staff to help staff members to do the surfacing of employability work, to help students to understand the value of the experiences that they're undertaking. So we do know that students, as Louise said, they get into study, it's very content heavy a lot of the time. They don't kind of get to see the forest for the trees. So what we do is work with staff to kind of help them to unpack some of the experiences that students are engaged in during their time at uni, and to kind of piece it together so that they understand which pieces of learning, how they'll be able to articulate that, but also piece them together with other pieces of learning to make a bigger, more holistic, employable human.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing because I don't think the slides are going to help me from here. I have a series of questions that we've sort of prepared to talk to. If you have comments, if you have questions, please put them in chat. We may invite you to turn on your microphone if you're interested, but I know there's a lot of wisdom out beyond the panel within the group that is here today, so please feel free to contribute in chat. I'm going to jump into some more questions, and we'll jump back to chat if there's interesting things there that you'd like us to add to the discussion. So I'm going to go start with Anna and then work in the opposite direction for this question of how do you create an environment where students are willing to try things, where they're busy, they don't see the value, why would they put the effort in? But how do you create the environment where they do?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Dom. And I think it's that piece around what is the value? Are we explaining to our students what the value is? Sometimes we do a really great job of that, and sometimes it's not because we're not thinking, well, it is, it's just because we're not thinking about it. We're thinking about how to get the content that we need to get across to the students. So I think it's really super important that when we're trying to help our students to understand the capabilities or the development they're gaining from a particular activity, that we help them along the way by telling them why we're bothering to do this for them. And sometimes that can be just making the connection or contextualizing the information that we're giving them so that they understand that we're telling you this piece of information because in future work practices, you'll be applying it in this way. And sometimes it's as blatant as saying you need this because at some point you're going to have to be articulating your employability or these capabilities in a recruitment situation. You're going to need to be able to explain what it is that you've developed and how you've developed it. So I think for me, it's creating that environment is about giving them the why, telling them why it is that we're talking about this stuff and that we're helping them to understand what it is that they're developing.
Thanks. Suresh?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of it, and I think really telling them the why was something that also became very important considering the stuff that I end up teaching, to show them where it connects into the bigger scheme of things that they're learning. But one of the other things that I've been trying to do a lot of recently is to also show them where their strengths lie. For example, in a very simple case, in a lot of our chemistry questions or biology questions, there are multiple ways to solve a particular problem. And to be really honest, till now, I can't solve it with every different way that exists, but some of them can. And this is one of the things that I try to get them to do. Like, I try not to give them the answer, and I go up front to say, you know what, to be really honest, there are 5 ways to solve this, and I probably could only do one of them. And I actually invite them to show me the other methods, and half the time, I'll be honest, they get to the answer. I'm not sure how they got there. And I'm very open to them to say that you guys are going to get there because you know this stuff a lot better than I do. I can show you my method perfectly fine, but there's a lot of ways to get to this. So don't always be focused on, one correct answer. There's something that my time was really one correct answer was the only way. Whereas now there's multiple ways to skin a cat, and you got to know all those different ways, and be comfortable, using a method that's different from your friend, but knowing that the value of what you bring to that conversation. And it's something I've been trying to build in, whether it's discussion boards or in conversations with the different students that I've been having. Yeah.
Thanks, Suresh. And I think that value we bring as educators is incredibly important, and that, not just as teachers, but as real people with a whole heap of experience and different things we bring. Louise, can I jump to you for this question around how do you create an environment?
Sure. In terms of helping students to understand why it's valuable for them to think about their learning, one of the main strategies that we use is to make it a formal piece of assessment. So by giving students marks, we are articulating to them that we actually see the value in it. And I think that helps students to take it seriously. I think another approach that I've used before when students are talking about their learning strategies for anatomy and physiology is that we try to have, or I've tried to incorporate some elements of group work, because I find that when students talk to each other about learning strategies, especially if they know each other, they have a perception of what one of their friends might be like as a learner. And if they think, oh, my friend always does quite well, and they're using these learning strategies, they must be pretty good ones. I might try that myself as well. So that peer element can be really useful for creating that environment where they value it.
Louise, do you have any advice around how to get peers to talk to each other and to start building those networks, which are so important?
Yeah, that's a challenging one, actually. So we did, a couple of years ago, we had learning workshops in my first year course. So they didn't have any content in it at all, no anatomy and physiology content. It was strictly about learning how to learn, and they were compulsory and on campus and group work. So administrative nightmare, but a lot of fun. So sometimes students will say to me, oh, you know, I thought it was going to be a waste of time, and why did you make this compulsory? But when I was there, you know, I found it really valuable and I got to meet people. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to make it something that is part of their formula assessment or something that they have to come along and do.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you, Louise, and go this next question around how do you start? How do you introduce this work to students? I know that that first thing that gets said is often very important.
Yeah, I usually start in the first week by saying that it will be part of the course. And because I'm a teaching focused academic and it's also part of my research, I usually do say that as well. I say that, you know, I'm very much interested in student learning. I've learned a lot about it. These are some of the approaches that we're going to take. And I think it's really important for you to think about the best way to learn anatomy and physiology, because it is really difficult, and the learning strategies that you used in high school might not work for you at uni. So this is an opportunity for you to experiment. So just be really upfront with them and explain why you think it's important.
Thanks, Louise. I think sometimes we underestimate that value of being upfront and honest and sharing our passions in those ways. Anna.
Sure. So what we do a lot of is teaching our students how to self-reflect in a really general sense, and introducing self-reflection can go a number of different ways. Sometimes students are not particularly receptive to the concept of metacognition or self-reflection. They do push back a little bit, and that sometimes that's because, oh, I know how to do this, don't tell me how to do this kind of attitude, or sometimes it's just they don't see how it's relevant to the work that they're doing. So I think when we're introducing self-reflection for employability into courses and programs, it's kind of, again, it's important to kind of situate it and to understand, and again, to explain why. But also we give a really quite a simple structure for self-reflection to our students, and we try to get them to do it at the right time. So we don't want to be introducing students to something that they aren't going to be using straight away. It's wasted on them, and we want to get them just at the right time, just when it's going to be, we're going to get maximum results out of that reflective piece. We also do talk a lot to students that we're engaging with that self-reflection is not easy. I think a lot of us make an assumption that it's something that we can do naturally, and that's not necessarily the case. Some of us are much more reflective practitioners than others. It comes more naturally to us. So I think talking to students about the fact that if you struggle with self-reflection or metacognition, that's okay. Lots of us do, but providing some parameters around what they should be reflecting on, and then a structure of how they can reflect, and what we anticipate some of those reflective not outcomes, but what we hope that they'll be able to gain from those experiences, I think really helps the students just to kind of settle into it and think, okay, I kind of understand why I'm doing this now, and I hope we'll be able to see at the end of the process what my lecturer or my staff member is hoping to get out of it.
Thank you. And Anna, you mentioned some students finding it difficult, and I've probably been a little bit negative in my introduction, a little bit biased by my son and some of my own experiences of doing this, but some students, I imagine, take to some of this reflective practice like Adapt to Water and really love it and find that it works really well with them. Do you see that often? How do you, I guess, support those students who are like, this is amazing, I love it?
Yeah, I hate making these gross generalizations, but there kind of is a type of student that takes to it easier, and I guess we tend to find a little bit more pushback in those scientific areas where a student's more likely to want to work more methodically through a process. They're not used to necessarily thinking about their thinking, and it takes a little while for them to engage in that way. Students with a very generally speaking, a humanities bent tend to do it a little bit more naturally, but that's not to say that it doesn't happen the other way around as well. And I think also this is why a structure is sometimes really helpful for those who are a bit reluctant. If they want to work more methodically through it, the structure gives them that. For students who are really passionate about it, then I think it might be around making sure that they understand what the purpose, and not getting a little bit too flowery and off on a tangent and lost in the detail, but keeping them focused into why they're reflecting and how to get the best outcomes of that. And then that great piece about, great, I've learned something about myself through this process. What do I do with it now? So where do I take this? How do I apply it in the next piece of my work or my study or my future career? What's that next piece?
Thank you. Suresh, can I go to you and ask you a little bit about how you introduce these sort of approaches in your teaching?
I think one of the first things, I mean, I get to see my first days in week 2. So that's when I actually get to see them. So by the point in time, they've got a tough week gone past. And I think one of the first things I do in my week 2 lecture is going, how many of you are overwhelmed? And you know, in the lecture theater, you know, online, get them to raise their hands. And I'm always one of the first few to raise my hand up there, just in a couple of seconds, to ask them to look around and go, you're not alone. I think that's the one thing that I've realized, that some of them, you know, when they look at their stuff, they go, oh, I don't know how to do this. Why does the other person already know how to do this? They are so far ahead. And I always emphasize the fact that it's week 2. You know, there is 12 more, 11, 12 more weeks to go. And it's a tough journey. It's not meant to be easy as well. And so if you're struggling now, look around you. The people whose arms are raised, they are struggling as well. Those arms are not raised. Does not mean they're not struggling. They just don't want to tell you about it. So, you know, look left, look right, look to the front. I'm here. I'm struggling. It's week 2. Slides are not ready. Things are not going well this first. And so, you know, it's sort of a conversation we need to have with each other. You know, if you're struggling, reach out early, talk to the person beside you. I'm always available. And we try to create different platforms for them to be able to converse with, not just, you know, the lecturers in the classes. The tutors are also told to, you know, keep an eye out for students, just have casual conversations with them. At our school, we are lucky enough to have Carly, who's our student experience coordinator, who, you know, students can always pop in and have a chat with her if they need to. And so just different mediums to connect with them. We do realize that the transition from high school to university is getting bigger, and the diversity of the students we're getting, just in terms of academic levels, are also really different now, that we're expecting all of them to be solid people in week 1, to be really honest, in a lot of cases. And they're just not there. And that conversation, just to normalize that experience, I think has become an important part of where I sit with that first course, that first semester first course in week 2, that they come to see us.
Thanks, Suresh. And I really love those themes around connection and how important that is for people to connect, to do these deep and valuable things, and how that creates the environment, and that awareness of where our students are at, to be able to be receptive for messages, to be able to be on that journey, which I think has come up again with you, Anna, is around being at the right time in the right place. All right, Louise, I'm going to jump to you for this next one. So after you've begun, after you've got students first tying in, how do you support and reinforce and keep motivating to do this work? As Suresh mentioned, students are busy, particularly throughout semester. You get exams and assessment hitting hard, and sometimes it can be really hard to stay focused.
Yeah, sure. We also use reflections, and as Anna mentioned, as a scientist, it doesn't come naturally for us sometimes. And they're summative, reflective tasks, and we've set them up as quite structured and guided reflections. And just coming back to that idea of getting them to reflect at the right time about, I guess, the right things, if you like. So for my students, when I'm thinking about how they can approach their learning, I use a theoretical framework of self-regulated learning, which you don't really need to understand, but basically it's just this idea that when you're learning, you initially start off thinking about the task and setting goals, then you do the learning, and then you reflect on it. So there's sort of 3 steps. So we ask questions at the beginning of semester that are worth about 3 to 5% for one task. We ask them questions about their goals and how they're feeling about learning the course, just get them sort of starting off. And then we usually ask them something a little bit around the time of the mid-semester exam about their approaches to learning. And then after they get the results back, get them to reflect on that process. So 2 things there, I guess. Firstly, getting the timing right, and then also by making it assessment, the students are encouraged to engage in it.
Thanks, Luz. How did you get to know it was the right spot and the right time for your students?
Mostly from talking to them, actually, over the years. They often come to me after the mid-semester exam, and if they're disappointed with their results and they don't know what's gone wrong, or they might talk to me about, I don't really know how to learn any better than this. So it really came from what the students were saying to me.
Yeah, and I think I would love to have that question from a student. That I, being able to create that relationship with someone can come and say that I don't know how to learn better than this, and be in a position to admit that and to ask for help is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, can I jump to you around how you support and reinforce and keep motivating people through their work?
Yeah, so I think because a lot of the work that I do is around general employability development and kind of more general capabilities that are developed through courses, I think I think because it's possible to make the connection to future work practices that does, or it can, if used correctly, that can motivate students to engage in these kind of practices, because they can see, especially when a student's professional identity is fairly clear. So if we're able to, in some professional programs, obviously, if you're studying nursing, you're likely to be a nurse. That process is easier. It's easier to contextualize the kind of employability development for that particular identity, and it's harder for some others. But because we can contextualize to future work practices, that is a motivator for students if they're looking further down the track and they're thinking, what am I going to do when I finish? The other way I think we can, the good thing about employability development is that if we're clever about using authentic assessment, students can immediately see how they're applying the capabilities that they're learning in their courses in a practical, more industry standardized way. So authentic assessment definitely is your friend here and can help a lot with motivating students. I can see how I'm using this. I understand how it's going to be used in the future. So that's really helpful as well. And then, as I mentioned before, often in the later courses, or potentially attached to work integrated learning, you can start doing some of that recruitment preparation pieces that also really tie in employability development back into that. What am I actually going to do in order to leave university and transition into the workplace? So I do feel like some of these broader capabilities, and even our graduate attributes, I feel like if we're able to tie them into this next steps, what are my next steps, then it does keep some students more motivated on that pathway.
Thanks, Anna. I was going to mention those revised graduate attributes, and I think it's one of the really nice things about the new policy is that connection between the co-curricular and extracurricular and the curricular, and trying to, CETU does some really great things in all of those spaces, and connecting them up for students can make a big difference. Suresh, how do you keep that motivation going throughout the semester?
It's always a tough one, because we ourselves aren't that motivated throughout the semester, are we? But I think I've taken a little bit of a different approach, because I've also realized, through all the different work that I do at a school, that it's often difficult for our students to, engage in some of these different learning experiences, or seek different experiences, particularly because they're actually pretty much loaded. The academic content side of things, the assessments and the everything else actually takes a lot of their time, and that doesn't really give them a lot of space to do stuff. So one of the things that I've sort of tried to put across in our school, and we've done this year, is to actually get coordinators of the courses in the same semester to sit down and discuss assessment, not really durations, but rather distribution of the assessments across the semester. So trying to make sure that students are not loaded in particular weeks, that they're not actually having major assignments coming together, try to distribute it, so they have that conversation, which I felt previously we never really had. Everyone's, with their own causes and stuff like that. So what happens when you start to adjust your assessments across the semester? Potentially you're giving students a bit more time with all of these activities that they can get more involved in. And then, of course, the structure side of things, and with the conversation with the students, well, the discussion boards are always there, that I'm someone that tries to go in every other day, at least to have a conversation with them. I feel that as long as you're responding, they are going to be able to converse with you. Once you stop responding to them, that's when they start going, this is just, a farce and you're just wasting my time. But engaging them in that conversation, in that discussion spaces, students who make appointments with me to meet me, they make an appointment for an hour, they don't really get to leave after they're done. I start asking them further questions, really telling them that if you come and see me for an hour, you got a whole hour. I'm not going to just answer your 2 questions and get you out the door because, I've got other things to do. That prompts them to have more, conversations. And if you're done with that specific question they have, how are the things going? Is there stuff that we could look into? In the unique nature of my position, then feedback that they're giving me can actually help them in other causes, in other experiences that they may want to. And in that conversations have come up a lot of new initiatives that our school has been able to implement. So I guess it is really that efforts that are coming from us to keep that conversation going with individuals or groups of them, just giving up time, I guess, that we really are stretched, but it does help, I think.
Thanks, Suresh. Okay. Louise, I'm going to come to you last on this question because I know it's your area of scholarship around how you know this stuff works and so on. So I know that could be that one I'm looking forward to. But I'm going to go with Suresh still. How do you know when things are working in these sort of spaces, Suresh?
I think a lot of it is the informal vibes, because our students well, as it gets in, we see the same students across, the entire program. And we've seen some students, looking at in their 3rd year going, yeah, I remember that in the 1st year, makes some sense now. Not all of them, we hope more of them will do that. But you have enough case studies of people going, yeah, now it makes sense. Maybe at that point in time, yeah, it didn't make sense. And we've got students who've gone out, I guess, into the working industry, have come back and said, yeah, I remember this particular conversation we had at certain points. And I don't remember that conversation, to be really honest, but they do. And I think that's where I feel that we've made some difference. Could be more, but at least we know that we are on the right track with some. And I think that we should keep doing it, and see what else we can help.
Thanks, Suresh. Anna.
Yeah, there's not much more I can add on to what Suresh said. We get the same thing. So we don't get a lot of immediate feedback like, oh, thank goodness you've taught me this now. It was mind-blowing. We get students coming back, several semesters afterwards, or perhaps even, as Suresh said, after they've graduated and said, oh, I get it now. I understand how this has helped me with study and with transitioning out into the big wide world. But yeah, it tends to come a little bit later.
And how do you cope with that? It's a tricky space to be able to go, look, I know I'm doing the right thing, and then having to wait, sitting into semester to know, let alone wait 2 years to know or 3 years to know.
Yeah,
what
lag
gives
measures.
Yeah.
I think we get enough. I think we get just enough feedback immediately to know that it's okay. But it does tend to be one of those things that you get the better quality feedback saying, oh, I really understand this. I really understand the benefit of this now. But you do get a little bit now and then to go, oh, okay, I've been able to use this in this circumstance or in this circumstance, and it's been helpful. Or I've taken what you've taught me how to do this, and I've taken it completely to another space and used it effectively there. And sometimes we get those little bits of feedback, and that's really that does keep you going.
Thanks, Anna. All right, Louise, I know you've done an incredible amount of work in this space to know how metacognition is working with your students and how to sustain it, how to improve it. Can you give us a quick overview, and we might dive a bit deeper?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the main thing is that we ask our students for consent to use their assessment for research as well. So because we're including formal reflections as part of their assessment, we can evaluate what they say in those reflections if they've consented to be part of the research project. So that's really valuable in terms of trying to work out whether something is working or not. Also, because it's assessment, it means that most students complete it and they put a lot of effort into it. So unlike a survey where you might ask them a short answer or open-ended response, you might get a couple of sentences, 1 or 2, but when it is an assessment item, you get a much more rich reflective response. So that is really valuable. And we've asked our students in a few different scenarios what they think about these more formal reflections, which we call meta-learning tasks. But I've also asked them about other types of learning interventions that I've done as well, like learning workshops or Blackboard discussion forums where students talk to each other about how they learn. And usually most students are quite positive about it, and they say that it has been valuable for their learning, and they give lots of reasons for why that might be. Usually the main reason is that they think that it has helped them to reflect on their learning, which is not surprising because that's what we're trying to do. And also it's encouraged them to think about their learning strategies. So probably one of the things that I'm most excited about actually is that whenever we get students together talking about learning strategies, I usually ask a really open-ended question about whether students have tried different learning strategies during the semester, and if they have, where have they learnt about them from? And they do actually mention whichever intervention we're using pretty regularly as a source of new learning strategies that they've tried. But we do try, so we try to get the students' perspective, but then we also try to get some more objective perspectives as well, if you like. So, for example, whether their exam grades have changed. And I must admit that probably the more disappointing side is that often these interventions don't always translate to better grades. Although it is really hard to measure that, because who knows what mark they would have got if we didn't have the intervention. It's really hard to control in these sorts of education environments. And also it might just take a few semesters before it really sort of clicks for students. So I think sometimes, especially in the sciences, we really undervalue the student's perspective, but I actually think that that's probably one of the more important evaluation methods to consider.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, I will go to my next question. So I'll start with you, Louise, about what do you wish you knew when you started this work? What do you wish someone had been able to go, here's some advice, this will help you. Oh, wait a minute. Greg, sorry,
Yeah.
Before you do that, I will jump back to the question in chat from Greg about over what timeframes for improvement of grades.
Sure. So we only measure within one semester, so it's a very short time frame. So it's probably not surprising that grades don't really change much between the mid-semester exam and the end of semester exam, especially for first-year students as well.
Yeah, Louise, like just with academic advising for students, often the first semester after advice is very similar, but then later semesters tend to pick up more there. So don't despair. The impact might be after that, which is great.
Thanks, Greg. That's so true. I'm an academic advisor as well, and you've just made me reflect that that is true. It's often, you know, second or third year where their grades really start to pick up.
And one of the things that started this journey to this panel for me was talking to someone last year who received an email from a student who, I think in the email, admitted that they panned the capstone class as one of the worst classes they'd had when they were at university. And within 6 months of being in the workforce, email back going, it was one of the best courses I've ever taken. Sorry, I gave you a bad secret response. And started me thinking, how do we actually help bring that realization further forward? So that delayed work to realize that value can be really hard. But occasionally when you see those glimmers can be wonderful. All right, sorry, Louise, I'll jump back to the question of what do you wish you knew when you started this work?
I wish that I had thought to be more creative with assessment. And I know that that's sometimes dictated a little bit by the school that you're in. But I think if I could go back, I would say to myself, be creative with your assessment, be cross-disciplinary if you can. Don't be stuck in your own norms for the discipline.
I think we've lost Louise there. All right. If we get Louise back, we can jump back to it. But Suresh, can I jump across to you? And what do you wish you knew when you started doing this sort of work?
Ooh, I think along the lines of what Louise was saying, but I think for me as well is not be so eager to jump into the content. I think that's something that as I was sharing just now, this gap between where they're coming from to where we want them to be, and at least the first year or two, it was a lot more of okay, you need to get started and cram it in because they need to get to this outcome, and it's just that increasingly I realized that the more they are supported, the more you take time out of that portion to build them a good foundation, they're actually going to get there potentially even much faster than you would have expected. So just take a step back and see what what you could put in place to build that foundation and to give them better support prior to just giving them the content.
Thanks, Suresh. It's great advice. Anna.
Yeah, I agree with both Suresh and the bit that we got out of Louise before she left us. But I think I think being a little bit innovative in how you're explaining what you hope to get out of the course to students, and I think not being afraid to actually articulate it and to say to students, you're learning this piece of theory, or you're learning this particular skill or capability, and just in naming it and talking about it and talking about what it might look like in practice and connecting it to other courses across that that they'll be engaging with across the program. I think just joining the dots a little bit for students is really helpful. I think as we've said, they're bombarded with information. So if we can join some of those dots for them so they can see how the pathway works and they can make sense of it in their heads without having to figure that out themselves. I think that if I'd known that earlier on, if I'd known I could be more explicit to students about joining those dots, I think it would have made it better for me and for the students.
Thanks, Anna. Louise, sorry we lost you there for a moment. So can I jump back to you around what you wish you knew at the start? I think we heard about being more creative with assessment and started talking around being cross-disciplinary.
Oh, sorry about that home internet connection. So I think, in the sciences, we often don't use reflections. So being able to just sort of think a little bit more like someone from humanities, perhaps, and build in some assessment that's a little bit more cross-disciplinary, a little bit more creative, and that it doesn't have to necessarily be too closely tied to the content.
Thank you. And can I ask, I'll ask this of everyone who's here, has anyone ever done something like this and gone, I nailed it the first time. It was absolutely perfect. I knew what I was doing. So like, I couldn't imagine, I have never done something as complex as incorporating any of these sort of ideas and got it absolutely right the first time. So if there's anyone out there who has, please let me know. I would love to hear. But also if you're trying and you're stepping out, my advice is to take the great advice of people who've gone there before, to reach out, talk to them, and recognize this is tricky. This will take time, and that it gets better. Yep, absolutely, Luke. That modeling fallibility can really help it. And as Suresh was saying, bringing your strengths and connecting to students and letting them see where you're at. And as Tim said, joining the dots. So I have a couple of last minute notices I've got to give. So at this point, I'd love to say thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Louise. Really enjoyed chatting to you and really enjoyed your advice and your feedback and sharing the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much for that today. And I don't want to lose everyone. So I'm going to jump back to some slides. I'm also going to try, we're trying a poll for getting some feedback. So I'm going to launch a quick evaluation poll. Let's hope that works. If you could give us some quick feedback about the session, we'd appreciate it. We'll also be asking for some feedback around the whole week later on. It is an anonymous poll, so you can answer however you wish and we won't know it's you. But if you have that second to give some advice, again, we'll try and hopefully do better things next time. Okay, So hopefully you can see that well. Also, I can give a quick update on some of these slides. So this is the very start of Ready to Teach Week. Across this whole week, we have a whole series of activities ranging from making a difference with applying UDL, which is coming up right after this session at 10 o'clock. We're trying to have about a 10-minute break between things, which is why I'm wrapping up at this point in time. And all of them are aimed at trying to give you advice that you can apply in a couple of weeks' time. So hopefully it gives you something you can think about next week. And when week 1 rolls around, there might be an idea around something Louise or Suresh has said, you went, okay, I can bring this in when I'm teaching, when I'm first meeting my students, or a couple of weeks down the track. I also want to highlight that we've got what's new in e-learning. Things keep changing in that space, is always worth keeping up. And there's an integrity officers update. Sorry, I said it was Thursday earlier. It's actually on Wednesday afternoon. That'll be an interesting one to get along to. And there's a whole range of other exciting things throughout the week. If you have any questions around them, please reach out to Italy Marcoms or to Italy, and we will get you some support and advice around how to make that happen. And I think I've come in early. Sorry about that. So the last thing I wanted to say was thank you to everyone who's participated, who's been here this morning. In just over 10 minutes, we'll have another session. If you have questions, I'm also very happy to answer them. Please reach out to me. If you want to reach out to any of our panel members, I know they're incredibly busy people, but they're also incredibly good people to have a chat with, have a cup of coffee with, and share some of their skills and expertise. So I'm going to wrap it up there and say thank you. And I hope you have a fantastic Ready to Teach week.